Management has a huge impact on every aspect of a business. The management team sets your agenda, makes your corporate policy, and inspires the rest of your workforce. Perhaps most importantly, managers are directly responsible for ensuring your workplace is safe and your staff well trained. Over the next half hour, we will be discussing the responsibilities shouldered by directors and how to keep your company fit for business.
Health and safety in any organisation starts with having a good health and safety culture. It either comes from the senior management team, but I also think it comes from the staff working at the coalface, because if both teams don't work together to create the culture, it's absolutely pointless.
First aid training is so important for businesses. They've got a legal duty of care to comply with Regulations 1981, which says that they have to make appropriate and adequate provision for first aid, whatever size company that they've got.
Much of the legislation that has been made under the Health and Safety at Work Act, together with regulations, has placed lots of requirements on organisations, together with best practice in the industry as well.
20 years ago, companies employed most of their own staff. Now, most of the work is outsourced to either a supply chain or a subcontract. The risk has moved from the key organisation to the supply chain. And this is something that we've not been very, very good at controlling. When it's internal staff, we give training, we give systems to our own people, risk assessments. But when it's put out to supply chain, we tend to forget about the responsibility still sits with the key organisation.
Training is central to creating a safe working environment, an absolute necessity for every member of staff. But there's more to training than meeting your obligations. To really have an effect, you need to seek out quality training from a provider who understands your specific needs.
A company would normally produce a training matrix. This is derived from looking at the contents of the health and safety policy together with legislation, and from that a training matrix would be developed for each person within the business. An example would be if you're a director in the business, you may require to receive some training on your duties and responsibilities as a director, which are very important.
The idea of the first aid training is to make it as easy and accessible as possible, so that if somebody is in an emergency situation, that they're not having to think through too many things, and that they can quite clearly and simply work out what they have to do. So over the years, they've taken out a lot of the more complicated steps that used to be in there and tried to make it a much easier topic to learn and a much better life skill for everyone, not just in the workplace.
Everybody should have a health and safety basic awareness, so some form of induction training or some form of formal qualifications. So, for example, the IOSH Working Safely course, which is a very good introduction to various different topics in the workplace.
The level of training required by each worker is evolved from two things. One, of course, is the health and safety policy together with the risk assessment. So within the risk assessment, that will always identify the training needs for that particular individual, and that would be based on the activities that person is likely to be undertaken.
I want to know about the people I'm training and about where they work and what they do, because I can train you in manual handling, and traditional manual handling is you pick up a box properly, you walk across the room, put it down, usually an empty box. But when does a plumber ever pick up an empty box and walk across from one table to another? They don't. They're in very strange positions, under sinks, in strange, small, confined spaces. So I think training has to adapt to what people need to make them safer.
I'd like the people to be far more engaged when they're coming to do a first aid course, so that they can really learn how to help someone if they have a medical emergency, because that's what it's all about. It's not about a piece of paper, it's about knowing and understanding how to help if something happens. If you've got the parents, for example, within your workforce, and you can offer them the capability of learning child and baby first aid as well as adult first aid at work, then they then see it as a benefit rather than a chore having to attend a first aid course.
Once training is completed, safety can feel like a secondary concern. But a good health and safety policy needs to be more than meeting the regulations. A comprehensive culture of safety is how you ensure that your business can operate safely for years to come.
I'm not sure that businesses do think enough about health and safety and first aid. They see it as an obligation that they have to do. It tends to be focused on a business side of things, very much on the certification and on doing the bare minimum. This is a huge generalisation, but doing the bare minimum to get the certificate, which means that they comply with the regulations.
Management teams have got responsibility for ensuring that their business meets the requirements of both legislation together with best practice. In general, organisations have some systems of work and procedures in place to manage risk. The failings normally occur because either management have failed to actually implement those procedures, which in some cases occurs due to the pressure of work. What is more common is what we call behavioural problems, and that is where an employee does not do what they're expected to do.
There's like an old saying that when you sat next to Nelly and you just copy what that particular person does all the time, that's how a lot of people tend to actually learn. And because that person's maybe been in that job for 30, 40 years, they've picked up their own habits. A new person comes into the workforce and they automatically pick up what the job role is, but also pick up the old bad habits as well. By having training and changing people's mindsets of what is the safe way to do it, that's how we actually eliminate more accidents in the workplace.
Technological advances happen quickly in the modern world, bringing both challenges and opportunities. More modern equipment can have greatly improved safety, but equally working with unfamiliar tools can create hazards. Whenever you introduce a new element to your workplace, it's important your staff are confident and understand best practices.
Many technologies are available to make the workplace safe. Improvements in materials. If you looked in the construction sector, movement of materials, which always causes problems. Equipment has been developed, enables people now to mechanically lift things up a traditional staircase. If you look to the handling of glass, suction devices have been developed to enable cranes now to lift glass in position.
It's not necessarily doing something dangerous and working in a dangerous environment. It's complacency, it's rushing, it's taking shortcuts that leads to the everyday accidents. Some of the most common accidents are things like falls, things like people getting fingers caught in machinery, falls, things falling on people. It's when they are rushing, it's when they're taking shortcuts, or it's when it's become every day and they've forgotten the health and safety side of things that have been put in there for a reason.
Within the industrial environment, there's several risks that are involved in it. Some of them are what we would term to be physical risk. So the physical type risk would be movement of plant, transport, etc. Some of the other risks that are involved are things such as substances and materials that are in use as well. So examples of substances and materials would be things like chemicals that are within the activities of the organisation, and of course also the fabric of the building, which in some cases with the older type premises may contain asbestos. Once we understand the risk within a business, we can then put procedures and systems in place to manage that particular risk.
If you are able to give prompt, appropriate first aid, you can prevent a minor injury turning into a major one, and you can also save lives. So the more people that are equipped with these skills and know how to help immediately, rather than waiting for the first aider to come or phoning an ambulance, which could be quite a while, first aid is prompt, immediate, appropriate treatment, and that saves lives and prevents injuries becoming worse.
Running a safe company starts with understanding the risks in your workplace. A truly complete risk assessment starts with auditing every piece of equipment and member of staff to find out how your policies work in practice. Third parties are a critical part of this process, bringing a valuable outside perspective that won't overlook unsafe practices.
To assess the risk on a site, This will require a detailed audit of the company to establish existing procedures that are in place to control those specific hazards. From that audit, you would then identify any parts of the analysis that require attention. For example, you may well discover that in fact safety product data sheets are being used instead of cost assessments, and therefore people within the organisation would require training to enable them to carry out cost assessments effectively. Very often companies fail to actually have an emergency plan which will effectively control a situation in the event of something going wrong. And of course a very good example of that could be an explosion within the workplace, and who's going to deal with things like the press and the media in terms of meeting people and explaining what action requires to be taken.
People love to have and collect certificates on the wall, but actually accreditations are more than that. So there's no point going for 20 accreditations if your company actually only works in an industry that has 2. Accreditations are good for business externally. It shows that you're at a certain level, that your company works at a certain level, it's got certain standards. If you go for an ISO, for instance, like 14001, it shows an industry standard, but it's actually based on what your company's doing. So all it will say is you need a policy. It will set out what the policy should have, but actually what you use is your policy. So you're regulating yourself against the accreditation. So it's good internally for your company and your company's culture, because it'll require a lot of people to be involved. It's not a tick box, but equally it's also good for business, because you can say we work to this standard.
Often what happens in supply chain management is that the first tier of contractors are accredited. What's really important to look at is, and very common certainly in the construction industry, is that the cascading tier of subcontractors that happens. And really good supply chain management will ensure that not only is each tier addressed, but that people are given the tools at the highest level to know how they themselves can subcontract appropriately with appropriate contractor management down. And that then gives the ultimate client a lot more, assurance that everything is being done appropriately. The biggest contribution is made by ensuring that the people as well as the documentation are right. So there's a balance between not only having the right documentation, but also having the right people with the right training, and dare one say the right behaviours. Many people have the right training, but actually don't necessarily exhibit those behaviours when they get on site.
It's better to outsource to a consultancy, because internally what tends to happen is it's given to somebody that's got health and safety responsibilities, they have other things to do, they have other commitments. And in my experience, we've seen this in the past where it doesn't get done to the right level. There's also tends to be a bias for organisation. Our friends, companies that we've been working with for many, many years, tend to turn a blind eye to their actions.
I think a lot of organisations are fearful. They believe they've got good contractors, and they're actually fearful that a robust interrogation of those contractors will reveal things they don't want to know. But I think organisations now are coming to the realisation that not asking the question isn't an acceptable defence. If something has gone wrong and someone said, were you aware that this was a possible process that would help the organisation, and you've not done it, then I think that's quite a challenging question to answer when it does go wrong.
There are various challenges in the first aid industry and in the training side. One of the main ones is language. A lot of the time, particularly in the construction industry, in the hospitality industry, and also in childcare, there are a lot of people with English as a second language. And that makes it slightly more difficult to train someone and to ensure that they have understood the learning and to test them appropriately. There are various things that you can do to help that. I mean, we have an online pre-learning that can assist them to understand what will be covered on the practical course, so that when they attend the practical course, they've already managed to go through it, sometimes in their own language, and it's familiar to them and they can work their way around. It's expensive to send somebody on a first aid course. Not just the price of the course, because actually in the grand scheme of things, first aid courses are not expensive. But the issue is that you then have to replace the person for the day or the 3 days that you're sending them on the course. And that prompts people to try and cut corners.
Some employees tend to put health and safety training on the back burner. It's a case of if they can look at other areas to actually keep the business afloat, and sometimes health and safety has been seen as a bit of a luxury, so any budget cuts, health and safety training sometimes has an effect of the staff haven't been trained, but ultimately if the employees are feeling valued and they are working in a safer environment and they are more productive in that way, then ultimately the profit margins will still remain the same or if not increase.
I think health and safety is given bad press a lot of the times, and I think particularly the health and safety executive, they get a blame for a lot of that press. And in fact, it is not the health and safety executive. It is really emphasis by the press, where they'll pick up on a very, very minor item and they will blame health and safety for it. In fact, legislation does not demand a great amount. As long as organisations can demonstrate that they're actually managing the risk, they're reasonably happy with it.
Health and safety isn't just crucial within a company's culture. It must be embedded throughout the entire supply chain. Effective, safe and transparent supply chain management helps to avoid the costly and severe repercussions of not being legally compliant.
Supply chain management, it's all about ensuring that anybody we employ on a contract or a subcontract basis, the work they carry out, it's done out in a safe manner, it meets legal requirements, and also that they're working to the requirements of your health and safety management system. It helps to develop the health and safety culture throughout an organisation. And what we mean by a health and safety culture, it's everybody within that organisation believing that good standards or high standards of health and safety are acceptable and achievable. People want to come to work. They want to work in safe environments. They want to go home into their family in the same state of health as what they arrived. So it's not just about reducing accidents, it's also ensuring that people are charged with notice. If they notice anything wrong in the workplace, they feel they're charged to go and put it right, to go and question other contractors on site as well.
Many boards of directors consider very carefully that one of their greatest areas of liability is this supply chain. Who works with them, who works for them, what works do they do? And often organisations don't really know how many they have in the supply chain, let alone who they are, and they don't know very much about how they perform, what processes and systems they have in place.
To start this off is quite a cultural shock. To suddenly speak to a supply chain and say, we are going to change your whole policies and the way that you work with us, can come as with a lot of resistance. And certainly we experienced this when we first started 14 years ago with our first client. It was an uphill battle. And for a lot of people, that uphill battle is just a battle too far. It's always easier to bury your head in the sand and just say, this will go away. But supply chains are here to stay and they need to be controlled.
When we look at what I would refer to as a gap analysis on a supply chain's health and safety management system, it's an in-depth analysis on their health and safety management system and also include parts of their environmental management. It's to ensure, first of all, that they've got a management system that adequately controls the risks within their business. It also is to ensure that the management team, middle management and employees are working to its requirements.
A lot of organisations focus extensively on health and safety, but the safety element of it, and a good supply chain management will also look at occupational health, hours of work, how people are selected, how they're retained, well-being at work, and a whole variety of other important occupational health components. A lot of organisations at board level look at enterprise risk management, look at the broad portfolio of risks that they're exposed to. And this is a significant component. There have been some cases recently where a supplier to a major multinational created an incident that nearly sunk one of the world's biggest companies.
What you can end up with is a supply chain family that is working in unison to a single goal. So the lead client puts processes into place which have to be followed by the whole supply chain. Now, this can be also used as a commercial benefit. If you have a number of organisations that you are considering working with, maybe one is slightly better on quality than the other, one's slightly better on price. But if you also include health and safety as part of that process, what you end up doing is working with a partnership approach with your supply chain.
Just as times have changed in the workplace, training methods have adapted to keep up. While once all training had to be face-to-face, today online courses are a major force in the industry. Able to retain the same high standards while allowing for flexible training hours and lower cost overheads, online courses offer a more economic alternative.
E-learning is the future of health and safety training. Organisations need to now think about costs, benefits, return on investment when thinking about putting people through training. The training itself is the same through all modes of training, whether it's classroom-based or e-learning. You still have to cover the same syllabuses, you've still got the same examinations to complete.
The Health and Safety Executive state that it's an employer's responsibility to ensure that everyone refreshes their knowledge on a regular basis and that their first aid qualifications remain up to date. An online training course will allow them to learn anytime, anywhere, and keep those vital skills up to speed. If they get tailored courses, then it will be tailored to the industry they're in, and then they can ensure that they are keeping all those critical skills fresh in their mind so that if they need to use it, they can.
E-learning's got many more benefits than classroom training, mainly due to the costs of the classroom training itself, and cost being the main driver of whether or not people will undertake training or whether an organisation will invest in training of its staff. Students can study 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and this can be a benefit to the employer as well as to the individual. A lot of the students that we find prefer studying at home in their own time, and this is a benefit to the employer.
Health and safety isn't just confined to your business. Companies across the world are working to improve their working environment, and you can benefit from their knowledge. Working with other companies can bring a different culture, a different perspective, or just a fresh set of eyes to improve your health and safety.
Sharing of knowledge and collaborating with other organisations is vital in the future of health and safety. Sharing experiences, sharing any accidental injuries or any events that have happened within your organisation will help us develop plans and future trainings to save lives in the future.
What we do with our e-learning programs is we have a multitude of forums, and because we have people from all different industries, all different parts of the world, they'll actually ask specific questions relating to their industry and some of the problems that they may be facing or seeking advice. And it's beautiful because people from Australia, maybe in the oil and gas industry, are talking to people in Sweden and they're sharing their experiences. And so our forums and our e-learning platforms is building quite a community where best practice has been shared quite regularly.
We've all got our strengths. You know, I know a lot about asbestos and fire, but I know very little about petrochemicals and sort of any of the M&E side of things, the mechanical and electrical. So why wouldn't I, and if we haven't got those skills, why wouldn't I pass it across to somebody else? And I think it's an industry that has been ridiculed in the past for having too many regulations, and it would help the industry if they all did work together.
NEBOSH is the National Examination Board for Occupational Safety and Health. Organisations across the board have struggled to meet the same standards. So one organisation using OSHA, which is a US-based organisation, and one organisation using IOSH, which is a UK-based organisation, would struggle to meet the same requirements on a global scale. Whereas NEBOSH have done two things. They've brought an international standard which people can understand, relate to and share across the global board, but also the integrity of their examinations. They hold those very dear to the future of health and safety training, and they understand that if there's any malpractice that goes with an examination, which has been prevalent with other providers, it will ruin their standard of training and ruin the health and safety culture globally as a whole.
A large number of the world's largest organisations now are seeing Africa as a very large area of growth for them, and governance in some of those countries isn't all that the major company would like it to be. And so when it implements a contractor management system, you can add significant gravitas and robustness to the supply chain. The reality of many countries is there is a sense of corruption, and it's, I think, often what makes big blue chip companies and big multinationals nervous to explore and exploit opportunities in certain countries. If you've got a robust accreditation system in situ, I think that would give reassurance to a board of directors that now do carry legal, responsibility for some of those liabilities.
One of our first clients that we had, we've now been carrying out accreditations for over 14 years. And we've seen an improvement ourselves in that whole supply chain. They've improved their performance. In fact, when we first started 14 years ago, we weren't welcome. But now they actually want us to go in there because they use it as part of their own improvement process. They have seen a 6-fold reduction in accidents and incidents. And we recognise that is through relentless training and also the implementation of a robust audited system.
In Britain, health and safety has been a part of our working culture for a long time, and our legislation relatively stable. However, there are still lessons to be learned about workplace safety. By looking across the globe, you can find a huge range of different approaches that could improve your workplace.
We have accepted health and safety as a nation, and although we all see the stigma of the health and safety and we all struggle to understand why it's in place, we do take the steps required to meet the legal requirements. Internationally, this isn't so, and over the last few years we've seen some massive increases in the take-up of health and safety legislations from many organisations. The Middle East is a great example. 5 years ago we went into that marketplace and there was very, very little emphasis put on health and safety training, and the value of a human life was negligible. Now they're very serious about the training, they're very serious about the legislations. They've got some laws in place now which protect and put the individuals first.
Currently people seem to focus on doing the absolute minimum possible to comply with the regulations. If they had more people trained, possibly to a lower level, to a shorter course, then the whole organisation begins to shift. They all begin to become more risk aware. And you know that whoever is there will be able to do the bare minimum to stop bleeding, to put someone in the recovery position, to put someone in the right position if they're having a heart attack, whilst the qualified first aider is on their way. But it's immediate and appropriate first aid that we're aiming for. And so surely the more people that you can get trained up in a business, the better it will be and the safer it will be for everyone.
Health and safety training is always going to be required. People will need refresher courses, people will always be coming into the industry. New best practices or legislation will dictate other bits of training to be undertaken, so there's always going to be a call for health and safety training.
New technology is advancing all the time. With regards to monitoring of procedures, software techniques now have been developed which automatically flag up where perhaps inspections have not been carried out on plant equipment.
The future for health and safety is looking very good. Training itself is becoming more and more available through different modes, whether that be video learning, whether that be e-learning, distant learning, or even classroom learning. All of these modes make it available to anybody globally, and as the market itself is expanding, we find that having different options available is the future.